Take a $5 bill out of your wallet. Look at the face. You probably recognize him immediately, but imagine meeting that man before anyone knew his name. He was 23 years old. He had almost no money. His formal education amounted to roughly a year of schooling, and the first business he entered collapsed. Then his business partner died. The debt didn't disappear. Lincoln inherited the debt. For years, he carried it. And that wasn't the end of his failures. He lost his first election, lost political opportunities again, built a legal career from scratch, and spent years trying to turn himself into someone the world would take seriously. Yet less than 3 decades after that, broke young man was struggling to find his direction. Abraham Lincoln was President of the United States, and today, his face sits on money. But here's the part I'm interested in. Lincoln didn't start with money. He started with something much harder to see: the ability to increase his own value. And that's where this story becomes a story about wealth. Because when you look at the $5 bill, you're looking at the ending. I'm more interested in the beginning, before the suit, before the presidency, before the photographs, before the $5 bill. There was a boy growing up in circumstances where education itself was scarce. Lincoln was born in Kentucky in 1809 and grew up in a frontier environment where formal schooling was limited. By his own later account, the schooling he received amounted to less than a year in total. Most of what he learned, he picked up himself. That sounds like a disadvantage. And it was. But Lincoln discovered something that didn't require a wealthy family. Knowledge could be accumulated. A book could be borrowed. A skill could be practiced. A difficult subject could be studied again. And unlike money, nobody could spend the knowledge once he had learned it. That became the first asset Lincoln built. And it wasn't sitting in a bank. It was sitting inside him. Here's where the usual success story gets it wrong. We love to tell ourselves that successful people start with advantages: better schools, better connections, better families, better opportunities. And sometimes they do. But Lincoln's early life shows another route. You can begin by increasing what you are capable of doing. He worked on farms. He worked on flatboats. He worked in stores. He served as a postmaster. He learned surveying. And eventually, he began studying law. Notice what was happening. He wasn't suddenly getting rich. He was stacking capabilities. Farm work gave him income. Surveying gave him a trade. Politics gave him experience. Reading expanded his knowledge. Law gave him a profession. And slowly, the value of the person himself was changing. That's a completely different way of looking at wealth. Because your first asset doesn't have to be a stock. It can be a skill that makes you more valuable than you were yesterday. But Lincoln was about to learn an even more expensive lesson. In 1832, Lincoln entered the world of business. It didn't go well. He and William Berry operated a store in New Salem. The store failed. Then Berry died in 1835, and Lincoln was left carrying the partnership's debts. The debt became so significant that Lincoln later referred to it as his national debt. He was still paying it down years later, including while serving in Congress. Now stop there, because this is where a lot of modern motivational stories would say, and Lincoln never gave up. That's true, but it's also useless. Almost everybody says they never give up. The more interesting question is, what did he do differently after the failure? He didn't try to become a better store owner. He didn't keep throwing money into the same business. He moved towards something else. He studied, he surveyed, he entered politics, and most importantly, he developed a skill with increasing economic value: law. That was the pivot. Lincoln studied law largely on his own. He borrowed books, he studied while working, he continued surveying to pay for his living expenses. In 1836, he obtained a law license, and in 1837, he moved to Springfield to begin practicing law. Picture the contrast. The young Lincoln, who couldn't make the store work, was now building expertise that people would actually pay him for. And that's the first major wealth lesson in this story. When you don't have capital, your ability can become your capital. That's not motivational fluff. It's economics. If you own $1,000 but have no useful skill, the $1,000 has a limit. But if you develop a skill that lets you produce $50,000, then $100,000, then $200,000, you've created something that can continually generate capital. Lincoln's breakthrough wasn't finding money, it was becoming more valuable. And then something even more powerful happened. His skills started creating something money alone cannot buy easily: reputation. Lincoln traveled throughout Illinois as a circuit-riding lawyer, covering enormous distances and building his reputation in courtrooms and communities along the way. This part of his story matters, because skill and reputation are different assets. A skill says, "I can do this." A reputation says, "Other people believe I can do this." And when those two combine, your economic value can rise dramatically. Lincoln wasn't wealthy because he had discovered a secret investment. He was building human capital, then professional capital, then political capital, then eventually, national influence. This is how wealth can begin before the money arrives. You build something valuable. You prove it. People recognize it. Your opportunities expand, and those opportunities create more resources. It's a ladder, not a lottery ticket. But Lincoln still wasn't finished, because there was one thing he had that money can't buy: time. Lincoln lost political races. He experienced setbacks. He spent years developing his legal career. Then, in 1858, he lost the U.S. Senate race in Illinois to Stephen Douglas. On paper, another loss. But something unexpected happened. The Lincoln-Douglas debates had given Lincoln national attention. The defeat didn't disappear. It became part of the path towards something bigger. And 2 years later, Lincoln won the presidency. That's a very different way to think about failure. A loss doesn't always become valuable immediately. Sometimes you only understand what it produced years later. That's why one of the most dangerous financial habits is judging every decision too quickly. People want quarterly results from 10-year decisions. They want instant proof that a skill will pay off, instant proof that a business will work, instant proof that an investment was correct. But some forms of value need time before they become visible. Lincoln's life is a perfect example. The election loss wasn't the end of the story. It was one event inside a much longer story. Now we can finally answer the title. How did a poor boy build wealth from almost nothing? Not by finding a magical investment, not by inheriting a fortune, not by getting rich overnight. He built it in layers. First, knowledge. He couldn't afford a traditional education, so he accumulated knowledge however he could. Second, skill. He converted that knowledge into law. Third, reputation. He became known through his work. Fourth, opportunity. His growing reputation opened doors in politics and public life. Fifth, influence. Eventually, that accumulated value put him in the highest office in the country. That's the part people miss. Wealth isn't always created by money first. Sometimes money comes after value. And that's a much more useful lesson than simply saying, work hard and never give up. Because hard work without increasing your value can leave you exhausted. Lincoln wasn't simply working more. He was becoming more capable. And now go back to the $5 bill. Lincoln's portrait first appeared on the $5 Federal Reserve note in 1914. That's more than 100 years after his birth. Think about the irony. A man who began life with very little formal education eventually had his face printed on one of the most recognizable pieces of money in America. But the irony goes even deeper. The man on the money didn't begin with money. He began with a deficit of education, a deficit of capital, a failed business, debt, political defeats, and uncertainty. What he accumulated instead was something harder to see: capability. And capability created opportunity. Opportunity created income. Income created stability. And reputation created influence on a scale that money alone could never have produced. That's why the $5 bill isn't the most interesting part of Lincoln's story. The interesting part is what happened before his face ever got there. So, if we strip Lincoln's story down to its economic mechanics, 4 things stand out. 1. Your starting point is not your final value. Lincoln didn't choose his childhood. He didn't choose the educational opportunities available to him. But he could influence what he learned next. Your starting resources matter. but they aren't the only resources you can build. 2. Skills can become capital. When you don't have much financial capital, building valuable skills can be one of the few assets you can accumulate without already being wealthy. Lincoln turned self-education into professional ability, and that ability changed his economic trajectory. 3. Reputation multiplies skill. Being capable is one thing. Having people trust your capability is another. Lincoln's legal and political reputation expanded the opportunities available to him. And opportunities are where capability starts turning into economic leverage. 4. Time can change the meaning of a loss. A defeat in 1 year can look completely different 10 years later. That's why you can't always judge a decision by its immediate result. Some assets need time. Some skills need time. Some reputations need time. And some opportunities only become visible after you've spent years preparing for them. We started with a 23-year-old whose business had failed. A man carrying debt. A man who had lost an election. A man who had no idea that his face would someday appear on American currency. And that's the part I want you to remember. He didn't know the ending while he was living the beginning. That's true for almost every meaningful form of wealth. You don't know which skill will become valuable. You don't know which relationship will open a door. You don't know which failure will redirect you towards something better. You don't know which decision will still matter 10 years from now. So the question isn't, how do I get rich from nothing? That's too simple. The better question is, what can I build inside myself that becomes more valuable over time? Because if you can build that, money becomes a consequence of value, not the starting point. And I want your honest opinion. If you had almost no money today, what would you build first? A skill, a business, or an investment portfolio? Pick one, and tell me why. Because your answer says a lot about how you think about wealth. And if you want more stories that reveal the money mechanics hiding behind successful people, businesses, and wealth, then please subscribe to this channel. Thank you.